This presentation, we're going to look at how you can use the notion of regions to divide a big area into smaller areas. It helps us organize information. It makes that information a lot easier to remember. This particular lesson could be used in a general geography class. It's applicable especially in U.S. history and early U.S. history or world history. We've got other examples of how you could do this with other parts of the world like Africa or Eurasia. A region is basically a group of places that are like each other and close to each other. It means you could draw a line around them. And the result would be a regional map, like the one that you see there. And it's the kind you see in lots of textbooks and atlases and things like that. Why make a regional map? Real simple, because it's a lot easier to remember the general shape of a region than the locations of all the individual places that were put together to make that region. So let's take a look at how you can make a simple regional map to help remember the environments of North America. The continent of North America is really tall. It stretches all the way from the equator almost to the North Pole. As a result, it's got an enormously wide range of natural environments: frozen ice caps, tundras, grasslands, a variety of different kinds of forests, deserts, and rainforests as you get closer toward the equator. The presentation is how you can draw just 4 lines to help organize knowledge of these regions. The rock line starts at the very northern tip of Alaska, and it goes down on a long diagonal to the east coast of central Mexico. That line is a generalization. All regional lines are generalizations. It traces the general position of a basic division between the western mountain region of relatively young rocks, high lands, a lot of steep slopes. The eastern region is older rocks, low hills, large, almost flat plains, lots of swamps. In the real world, of course, regional generalizations generally have exceptions. 3 important exceptions out west are the Willamette Valley of Oregon, the Snake River Plain, where we grow potatoes for French fries, the Central Valley of California, the most productive food growing area probably in the world. And in the east, we've got the Appalachian Mountains, but they're way shorter than the Western Mountains. Those are Kindlands, and a whole lot of low hills where the glaciers left a little bit more dirt when they were pushing around. You don't have to remember all these exceptions. It's easy to find that kind of information on a detailed map. The point is that that long line divides the continent into these 2 separate regions that have dramatically different character. You should be able to remember it. You should be able to draw it on a blank map whenever you see it, on the internet or on newspaper, on TV. Tip of Alaska, east coast of Mexico. The second line is what we'd call the farm line. It's a great big curve going roughly east-west through the Great Lakes. And some people say it looks like a sagging hammock, and its bottom is right down in the middle of Michigan. North of the line, it can freeze even in June. As a result, the summer growing season is too short for almost all food crops, and very few people live up there as a result. This line stops when you reach the mountains, because in the mountain region, the high peaks are what is cold, and the low valleys are warm, and they're scattered all the way around. It's not neatly divided north and south like it is out east. The line separates the east into 2 regions, a northern region too cold for farms, and a warmer region where it's possible to grow food. Then we've got a third line, runs due north from the southern tip of Texas. This line divides the eastern forest from the drier grasslands of the Great Plains. It also separates places that have more precipitation than trees need from places that have less. And here again, the mountain region out west is more complicated. In the west, it's the valleys that are dry, and the peaks are what get more rain and snow. And so you can't divide it into neat little regions like out east. If you put the farm and tree lines together on a map of electric lights at night, you can see that they basically outline the area where a lot of people live in rural areas. They live out on farms, they live out in small towns. When you go west of that, it's basically people living in big cities and very isolated ranches, and most of the western part is dark, except for the big cities. And with almost no, with very few exceptions, those cities are right next to high mountains that can capture a little bit of rain. Oh, and these two areas here are a little bit more complicated. They're oil fields where people are busy burning off gas. The last line is a 7-month line, and it just kind of basically runs east-west through the middle of the farm region. North of the line, people use more energy to heat their houses, and therefore they're using electricity and natural gas and some oil. South of the line, you need more air conditioning, and you're likely to use more electricity. And that has an effect on energy policy in the United States. This line was also dramatically important in US history because cotton needs 7 months of growing season, and it could only be grown south of that line. But it takes an enormous amount of labor. We've got other activities we'll talk about later. But that's the reason that people south of that line wanted to buy slaves, is because they needed so much more labor in order to grow that crop. Cotton, slavery, the Civil War, Reconstruction, these had long-lasting effects. And as a result, this line still marks important differences on maps of many topics: immigration, economic growth, education, life expectancy, politics, even religion. So that's it, 4 lines. We've divided North America into 6 basic regions: a Western Mountain region, a Northern Cold region, a Great Plains grassy region, a farm and factory region, and the Southern Pine Cotton region, and one that we don't use in US history, the hot and hilly region of Central America. Can you remember what these look like? The PowerPoint has just basically got a picture of each one of these regions and a description of all the words that would be associated: young rocks, earthquakes, dry lowlands, rainy slopes, snow up on the high peaks, ski resorts up on the high peaks, metal mines. All of these things are connected to the fact that these are the younger rock area. The Northern Cold region is old rocks, low hills, plains, slow growing trees, or maybe even no trees at all up near the Arctic Ocean. Very few people, very few roads. The Great Plains grassy region, grass, bison, cattle ranches, wheat fields. Great Lakes Forest Farm region, warm summers, cold winters. Hardwood forests, most of them cleared for cornfields, bean fields, dairy cows, lots of cities on the rivers around the Great Lakes. Southern Pine Cotton region, long summers, red soil, fast-growing forests, old cotton plantations, slavery, Civil War, sharecroppers, boll weevil. And the Central American region, it's a little bit harder to find just one picture for this. We'd show some slash and burn farming going on, but it's a more complicated region, and it's really out of where we're going to be talking about in US history anyway. And that's how you can use just a few lines to organize a whole lot of information about the country. Here's what it looks like if you draw them on a satellite image. The mountain line, and you can see how complicated that western part is. High forests on the mountains, deserts in the valleys. The farm line separating the dark conifer forests of Canada from the hardwood forests. The tree line where you've got the grasslands to the west and the forest to the east. 7-month line is a little harder to see on a satellite image because basically from a satellite, a cotton field and a soybean field look pretty much the same. Now, I gotta say, a geographic region is not a real thing out there. It's what we get when we draw lines to put similar places into groups. If we use different ways of deciding what places are similar, we get different regions. For example, some of your textbooks are going to want to have a separate region called the Desert Southwest. Uh, if you think that makes things easier to remember, fine. I suggest that it's easier and more accurate to remember two facts about the West. High is cooler with more rain and snow, low is hot and a whole lot drier. As a result, the high mountains have enough rain for trees, even in Arizona, New Mexico, Southern California, Mexico. And the low areas between the mountains are deserts all the way up into Canada. So your textbook are going to talk about the Pueblo people of Mesa Verde and say that they're living in the desert Southwest. And I think that hides something because they actually lived in a pine forest on a high hill in southwestern Colorado. Now, it's true, they were protected from enemies by the fact that the surrounding land is a really dry desert. But to say that they were the people of the desert and lived in the desert Southwest, I think is a simplification that hides a really important part of the truth. Let me show you a couple numbers here. These are the average temperatures through the year for Mesa Verde and for Holland, Michigan. Can you tell which is which? I mean, they both are in the high 20s in January and they go up to 72 and 71 in the summer. Here's the snowfall for Mesa Verde and Holland, Michigan. Can you tell me which is which? Right, you can't. And if you go up to the Pacific Northwest, which the textbooks are going to try to tell you, is this rainy area, it's true. The high mountains of Oregon and Washington get an awful lot of rain, and the coast does. But the eastern part of each state is a desert, even though they are not in the desert Southwest. So one of the main reasons to learn about regions is to recognize that all regional maps are generalizations, and you have to understand how they were made so you can understand what the generalization is about. And our generalization is, in the West, high is cool and rainy and snowy, and low is dry and hot. And an equally important goal is to realize that drawing a few simple lines can organize an awful lot of information. So one more time, I'll draw those lines on the satellite image and on that nighttime image. And remember, that's the little oil rig up there. So here's a map. And this lesson works. This is a map that was drawn by a 6th grade student in a pop quiz 2 weeks after we showed the PowerPoint. And there's another example from the same class. I mean, these students are able to remember what the continent looks like after they've drawn these lines. And that's the whole point. The whole point is to organize this information in your head so that you get a really good mental map of regions. And then you can use that map to look at all kinds of things. I'm going to give you just a few simple examples. Here's German immigrants in 1898. The tree line, the dry line, the cotton line. And in 1898, Germans wanted to move to North America, but they did not want to move to the dry West or to the hot and humid South. Here's a map of people who did not have health insurance in the year 2000. Here's a map of life expectancy, red being relatively low. We could show you a lot more maps like this. I'm just going to give you a bunch of websites on the PowerPoint. Uh, but look at a map of religion or high school graduation or Coke versus Pepsi. Remember the fact about this. People make regional maps by putting similar places together in their mind, and we decide what places are similar. In this presentation, you learned that just 4 lines can organize an awful lot of information if you know where to draw them on a map of North America. Now, this particular PowerPoint has got a question section on it that you could put in here, like, what do you call this kind of map? Why does North America have a wide range of environments? What regions does this line separate? What are some exceptions? And so on. Can you describe these 5 regions? What region is shown in this photo? How about this one? Describe the land in each major part of this satellite region. Why do some people want to identify a separate region here? What's shown in this photo? How would you describe the geographic position? What state has this river flowing through a dry desert?